Imagine the silence that comes when the world feels too loud, when every sound, every gesture, every subtle shift in someone's tone cuts into you as if your skin were thinner than theirs. You've always sensed things others brushed aside, carried emotions that weren't even yours, and stood in rooms where the atmosphere weighed heavier than the words spoken. This isn't weakness. This isn't fragility. This is the heightened sensitivity of a soul tuned to frequencies others never notice. And though it may feel like both a gift and a burden, it is also a profound invitation into the deepest layers of your own psyche. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For those who live with heightened sensitivity, that privilege often feels like both a calling and a curse. Because when the volume of the world is turned up so unbearably high, you are forced into an intimacy with yourself that others might spend lifetimes avoiding. What feels like an overstimulation from the outside is also a reminder. Within you lives an entire cosmos, rich, vast, and endlessly alive. The sensitivity you carry is not only to what lies around you, but also to the hidden chambers within you. When you are highly sensitive, the persona you wear in daily life, the mask Jung described as the version of you that negotiates with society, becomes both a shield and a prison. You learn early how to conceal the trembling of your inner life, how to present calm while beneath the surface storms rage. Others see composure, but you know the weight of holding back. They see your quietness and misinterpret it as fragility, when in truth it is the strength of restraint, the discipline of one who endures more than most would bear in silence. Yet even this persona can betray you. It can leave you feeling unseen, misunderstood, and disconnected from the authenticity you crave. But every mask eventually cracks. Every persona eventually strains beneath the truth it hides. For the highly sensitive soul, the breaking point is often exhaustion, the endless performing, the endless filtering, the endless balancing act between what you feel and what you show. And it is here in that exhaustion that the shadow begins to emerge. Jung described the shadow as everything we repress, everything we fear, everything we deny about ourselves. For the sensitive one, the shadow might take the form of anger buried beneath politeness, grief disguised as empathy, or rage hidden beneath the need to keep the peace. It shows itself in dreams, in sudden eruptions, in the quiet ache of knowing you've swallowed too much of the world without speaking what burns inside. And yet the shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. It whispers truths you've denied, and it shows you where you've abandoned yourself. When you feel resentment at being too available, when you feel the bitterness of being misunderstood, when your sensitivity turns into shame, the shadow is calling. It is not asking you to become harder, less sensitive, less yourself. It is asking you to become whole, to stand in the contradiction of being both tender and fierce, both open and boundaried, both vulnerable and powerful. The journey into the unconscious always begins with discomfort. For the highly sensitive soul, this discomfort is constant. The world stirs your inner depths relentlessly. But what if this was not a flaw? What if this constant stirring was precisely the material of transformation Jung taught, that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires us to integrate what lies in the unconscious with what we know in the light. And for the sensitive one, the unconscious is never silent. It speaks in feelings that appear without cause, in intuitive flashes, in dreams that feel more real than daylight. Your task is not to silence these messages, but to listen. To pause when others rush to notice, when others dismiss, to honor what rises even when it seems irrational, because it is often in the irrational that the deeper truth lives. Perhaps you have noticed how easily you absorb the moods of others. You walk into a room and feel the heaviness long before anyone speaks. You listen to a friend's story and find yourself carrying their grief as if it were your own. This permeability can feel overwhelming, but it is also a mirror into your anima or animus, the inner image of the other, the soul's balancing counterpart. To be highly sensitive is to feel the pull of this inner other, to sense in others what they themselves cannot feel, and to carry within yourself a profound intimacy with the unseen. This is not only empathy, It is a dialogue between your conscious self and the unconscious forces that live through you. And so the question emerges, what does it mean to live with this sensitivity, not as a burden, but as a path? It means allowing yourself to notice without drowning, to feel without losing, to hold the world not as a weight crushing you, but as a depth calling you. It means no longer rejecting your intensity, no longer apologizing for your perceptions, no longer trying to be less. Because the world does not need you to be less. The world needs you to be what you are, an instrument tuned to the hidden music of existence. The suffering of sensitivity is real. The overstimulation, the exhaustion, the ache of never fully belonging. These are wounds carved deeply into your being. But suffering, Jung said, is not meaningless. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. To carry sensitivity is to be pressed constantly toward consciousness, toward awareness, toward awakening. The pain you feel is not punishment. It is initiation. It is the call of the self, the archetype of wholeness, drawing you toward integration. Every moment you are overwhelmed, every time you feel too much, every time you withdraw into silence, you are being shaped by the very forces that will one day become your strength. Do not imagine this journey will make you harder. True transformation does not strip you of sensitivity. It deepens, it strengthens, it roots it. You may still feel the world intensely, but you will no longer be lost in the flood. You will stand within it as one who knows the depth you sense is the same depth you are. You are not at the mercy of your perceptions. You are their steward. And when you begin to see this, the very traits you once tried to escape become the tools of your individuation, the path to your wholeness. And so, if you have always felt the world too strongly, if you have carried the weight of unspoken things, if you have longed for a life where your sensitivity was not a curse but a gift, know this: you are not broken. You are not weak. You are being invited into a profound journey, one that asks for courage, honesty, and a willingness to see both your shadow and your light. This is the path of the highly sensitive soul. This is the path of becoming who you truly are. And when you begin to walk this path, something shifts. The world no longer feels like an endless assault of impressions, but like a vast mirror reflecting back to you what already lives within. You start to see that the overstimulation was never only about the noise outside, it was also about the unacknowledged depth inside. Every flicker of light, every tremor of emotion, every subtle gesture was striking chords in you that had long gone unheard. You were never simply absorbing the world. The world was resonating with the vast inner cathedral of your own being. This cathedral, Jung might say, is the psyche itself, layered, symbolic, alive with forgotten stories. To be highly sensitive is to live in constant contact with that psyche, with its archetypes, its shadows, its whispers of myth that rise in the smallest of moments. A glance from a stranger becomes a mythic mirror. A shift in the wind feels like a message, and your dreams at night speak louder than the news of the day. It can feel like too much, yet it is also the very soil from which meaning grows. Jung called this the symbolic life, and for those who are sensitive, it is less a choice than an inevitability. Without it, life feels flat, unbearable. With it, life is luminous, charged, and overflowing with significance. But here lies the tension: while you crave meaning, you may also feel crushed by it. When every moment is heavy with symbolism, when every experience carries such weight, you can begin to fear that you will collapse beneath the intensity. This is why boundaries are not just psychological strategies for the highly sensitive. They are sacred rituals of survival. Boundaries are not about shutting out life. They are about creating a vessel strong enough to hold the depth you've been given. Just as a chalice must be shaped to hold wine, your soul requires form to hold its sensitivity. Without boundaries, you leak. With them, you contain. And what you contain, you can transmute. Consider how often you have projected your inner life onto others. The teacher who felt larger than life, the lover who seemed to carry your salvation, the stranger whose glance filled you with inexplicable dread. These are projections, Jung would say, eruptions of the unconscious cast upon the canvas of the outer world. For the sensitive, one projection is especially powerful. You don't just see people as they are, you see them as figures in your own myth, mirrors of your hidden soul. This is both wondrous and dangerous. Wondrous because it allows you to experience life as charged with mystery. Dangerous because you risk losing yourself in illusions, mistaking inner images for outer truths. The work then is not to stop projecting because projection is inevitable, but to recognize it. To pause and ask, what am I truly seeing in this person? What part of myself am I meeting in their eyes? Every projection is a breadcrumb on the path back to yourself. When you withdraw those projections, when you recognize them as yours, you reclaim pieces of your own soul that were wandering in disguise, and with each piece reclaimed you become more whole, more solid, more rooted in the self. This process is never easy. It demands brutal honesty. It demands that you admit when you have mistaken longing for love, when you have turned another into the container for your unacknowledged shadow. But it also opens the door to liberation, because once you see that you are the source of the intensity, you feel you begin to hold your sensitivity with reverence rather than fear. The world no longer dictates your emotional reality, you do. You become the alchemist of your own depths. Dreams, too, become guides in this work. Jung taught that dreams are the language of the unconscious, the nightly theater in which your psyche plays out the dramas you avoid by day. For the sensitive one, dreams are rarely trivial. They are epic, vivid, and charged with feeling. Pay attention to them. Notice the symbols that repeat, the figures that haunt you, the landscapes that unfold. These are not random. They are messages. They are attempts by the self to lead you toward integration. A recurring dream of drowning might reveal the overwhelm you resist admitting. A dream of being chased might reveal the shadow you avoid. And a dream of light breaking through darkness may remind you that every descent carries within it the promise of ascent. To honor your dreams is to honor your unconscious, to write them down, to reflect on them, to hold them with curiosity rather than judgment. This is to live in dialogue with your soul. And over time, that dialogue transforms you. You begin to see that your sensitivity is not a curse, but a sensitivity to the unconscious itself, a closeness to the mysteries of psyche that others may never touch. This intimacy with the unseen is not a weakness. It is a calling. And yet, let us not romanticize it. Being highly sensitive still hurts. There are still days when the noise is too much, when you feel skinned alive by existence, when all you want is silence. But even in that pain lies meaning. Because every time you retreat, every time you fold into your solitude, you are not withdrawing from life, you are returning to the self. Solitude is not emptiness. For the sensitive soul, it is where the fragments of experience weave themselves back together, where the unconscious digests the raw material of life and offers it back as insight, clarity, and wisdom. Slowly you begin to trust the rhythm, immersion, withdrawal, return. You allow yourself to enter the world fully, to feel deeply, to be pierced. And then you allow yourself to step back, to rest, to restore. You no longer force yourself to keep pace with those who move through life armored and oblivious. You honor your own cycle, your own tempo. And in doing so, you discover balance, not the balance of numbing your sensitivity, but the balance of living it wisely. This is what individuation begins to look like for you, not the eradication of your sensitivity, but its integration. You do not try to become someone else. You become more deeply yourself. And as you do, you find that what once overwhelmed you now empowers you. What once felt like drowning now feels like depth. What once seemed like curse now reveals itself as gift. And so when the world feels too loud, too sharp, too heavy, remember this: you are not here to escape it. You are here to translate it. You are here to take what you feel so deeply and alchemize it into meaning, into creation, into a life that reflects the fullness of your soul. That is the true path of the highly sensitive one. That is the path of wholeness. There comes a point when you begin to realize that the very things you thought made you fragile are the same things that grant you an unusual kind of strength. Sensitivity, when left unexamined, may seem like an open wound that the world keeps pressing against. But as you turn toward it instead of away, as you begin to explore what it is asking of you, you uncover a secret. This sensitivity is not only to the external world, but also to the subtle stirrings of your own unconscious. You feel what others dismiss, and in that feeling lies access to layers of truth that most will never touch. In Jung's vision, every individual carries within them not only their personal history, but also the archetypal inheritance of humanity, the great images, symbols, and patterns that connect us all. For the highly sensitive person, this inheritance often breaks through more vividly. The myths of gods and goddesses, the motifs of light and shadow, the symbolic battles of transformation, they don't remain in books or stories. They play themselves out in your everyday life. An argument with a friend might echo with the weight of ancient betrayal. A dream of the sea might feel like a primordial return. You live closer to these archetypes not because you seek them, but because they seek you. This is why you may sometimes feel older than your years, burdened with an inexplicable sense of responsibility or meaning. It is not simply your life you are carrying. It is the archetypal current that flows through you. Jung saw this as both gift and task. To be touched by the archetypal is to be offered a chance at greater consciousness, but also to risk being swept away by it. For the sensitive one, the risk is real: to drown in myth, to confuse archetype with personal destiny, to be consumed by the enormity of what you feel. This is why the work of grounding is so vital. Without grounding, archetypes can overwhelm. With grounding, they can inspire, guide, and elevate. Think of the persona, again the mask you wear to meet the world. For the highly sensitive, the persona is often carefully crafted, polished to hide the storms inside. But behind it lives the shadow, restless yearning to be acknowledged. What you suppress, anger, envy, assertiveness, even joy too bright to show, accumulates in this shadow. The irony is that the more sensitive you are, the more shadow material you often generate, because your impulse to preserve harmony leads you to hide what feels disruptive. You bite back words, you swallow emotions, you hold yourself back, and the shadow grows. Yet there is a strange redemption here. The shadow is not just what you dislike, it is also what you need. The anger you repress may be the fire that teaches you boundaries. The envy you hide may reveal what your soul longs to create. The assertiveness you avoid may be the voice that protects you from being consumed. To integrate the shadow is to reclaim your full spectrum, to stop fragmenting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable. Jung reminds us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Sensitivity demands this of you. You cannot afford to run from your shadow. It will chase you until you turn and face it. And when you do, something astonishing happens. You no longer feel at the mercy of the world. You no longer feel as though every emotion belongs to someone else, as though you are endlessly porous. You begin to sense the difference between what is yours and what is not. You begin to realize that sensitivity without consciousness is vulnerability, but sensitivity with consciousness is power. To feel deeply and know what you are feeling, to discern the boundaries between projection and reality, between your shadow and another's, between your true self and your persona. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. The anima and animus too play their role in this journey. Jung described them as the inner contrasexual archetypes, the anima in men, the animus in women. But beyond gender, they represent the hidden counterpart within each of us, the inner other that draws us toward wholeness. For the sensitive person, these figures often make themselves known in profound ways through dreams of mysterious figures, through powerful attractions or repulsions, through sudden surges of inspiration that feel as though they come from beyond. They invite you into dialogue with the parts of yourself you have not yet claimed. They remind you that you are more than you appear, more than the mask, more than the roles. They are the whisper of wholeness, calling you forward. And yet, there is suffering. There is always suffering on this path. Jung himself acknowledged that to individuate, to become whole, is to walk a path strewn with conflict, paradox, and pain. For the highly sensitive, suffering is often amplified because every wound cuts deeply. Every disappointment echoes, every loss reverberates through your entire being. But do not mistake this suffering for mere misfortune. It is also initiation. The descent into suffering is the descent into the unconscious, into the places you would rather avoid. And in that descent lies the possibility of transformation. Think of the ancient myths, Orpheus descending into the underworld for love, Inanna stripped of her garments at the gates of death, Christ bearing the cross. These are not just stories of loss, they are stories of transformation. They mirror the psychological truth that every descent, if endured consciously, becomes the ground of rebirth. For you, the highly sensitive one, every time you descend into overwhelm, into heartbreak, into despair, you are given the chance to find within yourself a resilience that does not harden you, but deepens you. The seed of ascent is always hidden in the soil of descent. And slowly through this rhythm of descent and ascent of shadow and light of persona and self, you begin to glimpse what Jung called individuation. Not perfection, not the eradication of flaws, but the integration of opposites. You begin to live not as fragments pulled in every direction, but as a whole being. You see that your sensitivity is not a mistake, but a doorway. You are learning to walk through it to see what others cannot, to hold both the wound and the healing in the same heart. And perhaps this is why, though it hurts, you would not trade it away. Because in your deepest moments of silence, when the noise fades, you sense it the truth that you were meant to feel, that your sensitivity is not weakness, but destiny, and that through it you are being led painfully, beautifully toward the self, the wholeness that has been calling you all along. There are moments when you notice how the world seems to pass others by untouched, while you remain pierced by everything. A casual remark from a stranger lingers in you for days. The way light bends through a window feels like a revelation, and the sorrow in another's eyes becomes almost unbearable to witness. You may have wondered why you were given such a tender nervous system, why you cannot move through life with the same indifference you see in those around you. And yet the deeper you walk into this sensitivity, the more you begin to realize that it is not random. It is part of a larger pattern, an inner summons guiding you toward a way of being that demands more from you, but also offers more in return. Jung believed that the self, the archetype of wholeness, calls each of us forward in a way that is uniquely our own. For some, the call is quiet, hidden behind ambition or desire. For you, the highly sensitive one, the call is relentless. It comes in every impression, every dream, every sudden shift of feeling that seems to carry messages from another realm. It is as though the self has chosen to speak through your nervous system, amplifying every signal until you cannot ignore it. And while this may sometimes feel like torment, it is also a profound gift. For the self is not content with your survival. It longs for your transformation. This transformation unfolds most vividly in your relationships. Because you feel so deeply, you often find yourself entangled with others in ways that both nourish and wound you. You might lose yourself in another's story, mistake their needs for your own, or carry their emotions long after they've moved on. These entanglements reveal something essential, the unconscious tendency to merge, to dissolve boundaries in the name of empathy. Yet within that very tendency lies a lesson. Individuation does not mean cutting yourself off from others. It means learning to stand whole in their presence, to meet them not as a mirror of your projections, but as beings on their own journeys. It is here that the practice of withdrawal becomes sacred. Not withdrawal as avoidance, but withdrawal as returning to the self. When you step back from another's energy, you allow their image to dissolve, and in that dissolving, you begin to see what was projection and what was truth. You see the archetypes at play, the wounded child you longed to rescue, the idealized lover who carried your anima or animus, the authority figure who bore the weight of your unacknowledged anger. By stepping back, you retrieve these projections, you reclaim the parts of your soul that had scattered into the world. This is not abandonment of others. It is the remembering of yourself. And when you return to relationship from this place, something changes. You no longer carry others as burdens, nor do you lose yourself in their storms. You begin to meet them as equals, not saviors or enemies, not vessels for your shadow or fantasies, but as companions walking their own path of wholeness. This shift is profound. It means that sensitivity no longer makes you vulnerable to collapse. It becomes instead a bridge, a way of perceiving the depth in another without drowning in it. You sense them, you honor them, and you remain rooted in yourself. Still, the path is not free of pain. In fact, the pain often deepens as your awareness grows. You see more clearly the illusions others live in, the suffering they deny, the masks they cling to. And you cannot help but feel the dissonance between what is and what could be. This awareness can breed loneliness, the sense that you inhabit a world few others can even perceive. Yet loneliness too has its place. It is in solitude that your psyche ripens, that the fragments of your inner and outer life weave themselves into meaning. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Solitude prepares you for this transformation, so that when you meet another, you do so not as half a person seeking completion, but as a whole being ready to be changed and to change in return. Dreams will often guide you through this loneliness. A dream of a vast landscape might remind you that your inner world is never empty. A dream of an unknown figure might reveal the anima animus, or shadowed guide who walks with you unseen. Sensitive souls often dream with a clarity that astonishes, symbols, blazing feelings, intensified narratives that feel like revelations. These dreams are not distractions, they are maps. They point to the places where your conscious life has strayed, where your soul is calling you home. To dismiss them is to silence the very voice of the unconscious that seeks to heal you. To honor them is to walk with guidance that transcends your rational mind. And what of suffering? It does not vanish, but it shifts. You begin to see suffering less as a cruel accident and more as the crucible of transformation. Every heartbreak, every overstimulated collapse, every moment when you feel undone, these are not endings but thresholds. They break down the structures of the persona, the defenses that keep you small so that something larger can emerge. Like the alchemical vessel that must be heated until it cracks open, your soul undergoes its initiations through the fire of feeling. To resist this is to remain fragmented. To surrender is to be remade. This surrender does not mean passive endurance. It means conscious participation. It means noticing when you are overwhelmed and asking what truth is rising here. It means honoring your limits, not as signs of weakness, but as boundaries given by the self to preserve your wholeness. It means allowing grief to flow, rage to surface, joy to burst forth without shame. In doing so, you do not merely feel, you become the witness of feeling, the one who can hold the storm without being swept away. This witness is not detached. It is profoundly engaged. But it is rooted in the self, the ground of wholeness that no storm can shatter. And so slowly you begin to trust. You trust your sensitivity not as a liability, but as a compass. You trust the shadow not as a threat, but as a source of hidden strength. You trust the unconscious not as chaos, but as a wise companion. And most of all, you trust the self, the deeper center that has been guiding you all along. This trust does not eliminate fear, but it transforms it. You no longer fear being too much or too fragile because you know that what you carry is not weakness, but the very material of transformation. And perhaps when you look back, you begin to see the pattern. Every descent into pain brought you closer to compassion. Every moment of overstimulation taught you discernment. Every projection that shattered returned a piece of your soul. And all of it, every fragment, every scar, has been part of the journey toward wholeness. There is a stillness that comes when you stop fighting who you are, when the endless struggle to harden yourself, to numb yourself, to be like everyone else finally dissolves. In that stillness, you see with clarity that your sensitivity is not a flaw to be erased, but a doorway into the deepest truth of your existence. The persona that once served as your mask begins to loosen, and behind it you sense the quiet presence of the self, vast, steady, and waiting for you to return. This return is not a single moment, but a lifetime of small awakenings. Each time you honor what you feel instead of dismissing it, you step closer. Each time you allow the shadow to speak its truth instead of silencing it, you step closer. Each time you notice projection and reclaim it as your own reflection, you step closer. And with each step you become less fragmented, less scattered, less at war with yourself. You begin to embody what Jung meant when he wrote, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." Becoming does not mean discarding your past. It means integrating it, weaving every wound and every gift into a fabric that is uniquely yours. The sensitive soul carries many scars, memories of being misunderstood, dismissed, shamed for feeling too much. But these scars are not marks of weakness, they are the very texture of your wholeness. They are the evidence of your descent, the proof that you have walked through fires and emerged not untouched, but transformed. You no longer need to hide them. They are your story, your authenticity, your offering to a world starved for realness. And what of the world? The world that once felt unbearable begins to reveal its beauty in ways you could not have seen without your sensitivity. Where others rush past you, linger. Where others seek distraction, you notice. The sound of leaves in the wind becomes a song. The sorrow in a stranger's eyes becomes a mirror of shared humanity. The silence between words becomes a space filled with meaning. Your sensitivity does not simply make you suffer, it also makes you capable of wonder. And wonder, too, is a form of strength. Individuation in its essence is not about becoming invulnerable. It is about becoming whole. Wholeness is not perfection, not the erasure of conflict, but the capacity to hold opposites within yourself without being torn apart. You can be tender and fierce wounded and wise introverted and expressive. You can feel the chaos of the world and still find the still point within. You can descend into darkness and carry within you the unshakable knowledge that light is hidden there. This is the paradox. The highly sensitive soul learns to live with, not to resolve it, but to embody it. In relationships, this wholeness changes everything. You no longer approach others with the silent plea to complete you. You meet them as a whole being meeting another whole being open to transformation, but not dependent on it. You no longer need to save or to be saved. You can love without losing yourself. You can empathize without collapsing. You can walk beside another without carrying their entire weight. This is not detachment, it is mature intimacy rooted in the strength of yourself. And as you live more deeply in this way, you discover a new kind of service. The sensitivity that once left you raw now becomes a gift you offer. You notice what others overlook. You sense the unspoken pain in the room. You create meaning where others see only routine. Your very presence can be healing, not because you absorb the suffering of others, but because you embody a way of being that allows suffering to transform. You become a living reminder that vulnerability is not weakness, that depth is not danger, that wholeness is possible. The world does not always recognize this gift. Some will still see you as fragile, too much, too complicated. But you no longer need their recognition. You know what you are. You know that your sensitivity is a finely tuned instrument, one that can play both the dirges of grief and the symphonies of joy. You know that it connects you to the unconscious, to archetypes, to dreams, to the vastness of the self. You know that it has led you through shadow and suffering into a depth of meaning few will ever taste, and that knowing is enough. In time you may even feel gratitude for the very pain that once threatened to undo you, because without it you would never have descended, never have faced the shadow, never have discovered the inexhaustible well of strength within. You would never have been initiated into the symbolic life, never have glimpsed the beauty hidden in darkness, never have felt the call of the self so insistently. What once felt like curse has become initiation. What once felt like burden has become path. And so when you find yourself overwhelmed again, as you inevitably will, you can breathe and remember. This is not the end. This is another threshold. Another descent carrying within it the seed of ascent. Another chance to integrate, to grow, to become. You do not need to resist the rhythm. You need only to trust it. Trust that the self is guiding you. Trust that every fragment is part of the whole. Trust that even in your darkest moments you are not lost but being led. This is the paradox of the highly sensitive soul. The very thing that makes life so difficult is the same thing that makes life so meaningful. You are not fragile, you are finely attuned. You are not weak, you are deeply alive. You are not broken, you are being remade. And the journey is not to escape this truth, but to embody it, to live it, to become it. And so, you walk on not as someone who wishes to be less, but as someone who is finally ready to be fully themselves. Sensitive, yes. Vulnerable, yes. But also strong, wise, and whole. This is your path. This is your gift. This is who you are becoming. You pretend to be busy, not out of deceit, but out of defense. The rhythm of your days hums with small tasks and endless noise emails, screens, errands, the hum of the world pretending to matter. But beneath the surface, something waits. A silence. A face you've avoided for so long it's almost become invisible. That face is your own. You feel it when the day ends and the noise collapses into quiet. You scroll, you check, you refill the void with something, anything, because stillness might reveal too much. In that stillness, your reflection would begin to speak, and you're not sure you want to hear what it has to say. This is where Jung's world begins. Not in a library or a theory, but in this private moment, the one where you realize that your busyness is not life, but armor. You built it long ago, piece by piece. Each "I'm fine," each "I can't tonight," another brick. You tell yourself it's discipline, productivity, maturity. But beneath that polished surface lives a different truth you are afraid of being seen. Jung called this mask the persona, the face we show to the world so that the world will let us belong. It's not false, it's just incomplete. The persona helps you survive in public, but it also keeps you from knowing the depths of who you are in private. And when that mask grows too heavy, when the outer performance consumes the inner truth, your soul begins to whisper through symptoms, a sudden tiredness, a vague resentment, a loneliness that no amount of connection can cure. You tell yourself you're just busy, but maybe the busyness is the sickness. When you stop long enough, when the noise dies down, you might feel something move inside, a quiet stirring, like something ancient and neglected. That is the shadow beginning to breathe. The shadow isn't evil. It's everything you've exiled. Every impulse, fear, and desire you once judged too wild, too selfish, too strange. You buried it so deep that now it speaks only in dreams and irritations. When someone annoys you, when you feel that surge of judgment, how can they be like that? What you're really seeing is your own disowned self, wearing another person's face. Projection, Jung said, is the way the unconscious tries to return home. The world becomes a mirror. Every person you love or hate, every story that stirs you, carries a reflection of something unclaimed within you. And that's the quiet secret behind your busyness. If you slowed down, you might see too much. You might meet the parts of yourself you've carefully avoided, the envy, the longing, the exhaustion of pretending. There's a moment, always a quiet one, when the pretending cracks. Maybe it's after another empty conversation. Or when you wake up one morning and realize you've been performing for everyone, including yourself. The smile doesn't fit anymore. The schedule feels absurd. Something ancient begins to rise. It's not a crisis. It's an initiation. Jung called it the beginning of individuation, the slow, often painful process of becoming whole. It's not about becoming perfect. It's about integrating what you've rejected. You start to sense that your so-called flaws contain the very medicine you've been searching for. When you stop trying to be impressive, when you sit with your own discomfort without trying to fix it, something changes. The mask loosens. The world softens. You realize that beneath the anxiety of being seen lies the deeper fear of truly seeing yourself. You've spent so long constructing the image of who you should be that you've forgotten who you already are. There's a story. Jung loved the tale of the God who becomes human, forgets his divinity, and spends his life searching for what he already carries within. The myth isn't ancient. It's your biography. Every moment of your life has been an attempt to remember what was never lost. But remembering hurts. Because first, you must grieve. You grieve the years spent running, the connections you avoided, the depth you traded for comfort. And yet, in that grief, there's a strange beauty, the kind that only truth can carry. Because when you finally stop pretending to be busy, you start to feel You start to live from something more real than approval or performance. You notice how the light falls through the window differently. You hear your breath again. You realize that presence is not something to achieve, it's what remains when the distractions fall away. In that stillness, a faint voice stirs the anima, or animus, the inner counterpart, the soul image that bridges your conscious and unconscious worlds. It speaks not in words but in symbols, dreams, intuitions. You meet it in art, in longing, in the face of someone who awakens something nameless in you. It's as if life itself begins to court you back toward depth, and that's what your avoidance was really about. Not fear of others, but fear of depth. Because depth changes everything. Once you've tasted it, you can't go back to shallow living. But here's the secret. Jung knew your avoidance is sacred too. Every defense was built for a reason. Once, the mask protected a fragile self. The busyness kept you safe from a world that felt too sharp. You don't destroy those defenses, you thank them. You integrate them into a larger wholeness. This is not self-improvement. It's self-return. So next time you find yourself saying, "I'm just too busy," pause. Feel what's underneath. Maybe it's not obligation but exile, a small, forgotten part of you waiting to come home. Your soul is not asking for more to do. It's asking to be met. And in that meeting, the world begins to change not because the outer noise disappears, but because you no longer mistake it for life. You begin to see that stillness is not emptiness. It's presence. It's the place where the unconscious begins to speak again, softly at first, then with the authority of truth. You are not meant to live divided. You are meant to become whole. The journey begins the moment you stop pretending to be busy. You sit in a quiet room, but the quiet is not empty. It hums with everything you've been postponing. The longer you've hidden from your own depth, the louder it becomes. The tension is almost holy, like the moment before a storm breaks. This is where the descent begins. The underworld in Jung's language was never a place beneath your feet, but beneath your awareness. You think you're avoiding others, but what you're really avoiding is this journey inward, the confrontation with the one who lives beneath the mask. It begins in fragments. A dream you can't forget. A sudden wave of emotion that doesn't fit the situation. A face in the crowd that feels strangely familiar. These are the whispers of the unconscious. It doesn't shout. It arranges coincidences, stirs your emotions, unsettles your comfort. You may call it anxiety, but the psyche calls it awakening. You feel torn. Part of you still clings to the light of the known world, to order and control. Another part aches for the forbidden territory where meaning hides. It's the same conflict myths call the hero's journey, but in truth it's the soul's journey back to itself. You begin to dream more vividly. Strange images surface: water, mirrors, a child lost in a forest, a broken clock that keeps ticking. None of them make sense, yet they stir something ancient in you. Dreams are the language of the soul, Jung said, and every symbol is an invitation to dialogue. You start to see patterns not in events, but in yourself. How each avoidance carries the same taste of fear. How every person you pull away from mirrors a feeling you've never faced. The people you can't stand, the ones who awaken your judgment or envy, they are emissaries of your shadow. The shadow follows you everywhere. It hides in your reactions, in your tone, in your tiredness. You might see it in how you always need to be right, or in the way you downplay your gifts so no one feels threatened. Every defense reveals a tenderness you've never learned to protect openly. You begin to sense that the real work of becoming isn't about improvement, it's about integration. To own what you've denied, to see your own darkness and not flinch, to hold your flaws close enough that they begin to soften into wisdom. There's a night, maybe one you won't tell anyone about, when you wake up and feel like a stranger in your own life. The person you've been performing as suddenly feels distant, like a costume left behind after the play ends. You look around at your achievements, your relationships, your identity, and none of it fits. This is the collapse of the persona, the beginning of truth. You might mistake it for depression. And in a way, it is. The death of an old identity. Jung called these moments the night sea journey, when the ego is swallowed by the unconscious so that something greater can be born. In the darkness, you meet figures, inner guides, voices, fragments of lost memories. Sometimes they come as symbols: the wounded child, the wise old man, the lover, the monster. They are parts of you, waiting to be reclaimed. At first, it feels chaotic. But slowly, you realize this descent has direction. The psyche doesn't destroy without purpose. It dismantles illusions to make space for truth. You start listening to yourself in a new way. Not the mental chatter, but the voice underneath the quiet intuition that doesn't argue, just knows. You begin to sense that the soul doesn't want to be perfect. It wants to be whole. And wholeness includes contradiction. You are kind and cruel, selfless and selfish, strong and afraid. When you stop fighting your contradictions, they start to reveal their purpose. Anger becomes boundary. Sadness becomes tenderness. Fear becomes awareness. The world around you shifts too. You notice how everyone you meet carries their own silent storm, the same avoidance, the same loneliness dressed in different disguises. You stop taking things so personally because you start seeing through them. You realize that everyone is acting out their own unconscious myth. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You begin to see how much of your life was fate in disguise, the same relationships, the same mistakes, the same patterns looping through time like echoes. But instead of despair, you feel something else, possibility, because once you see the pattern, you are no longer trapped inside it. And yet, this awareness isn't bliss, it's responsibility. You can't unknow what you've seen. You can't go back to sleep. Still, the psyche doesn't demand perfection. It only asks for honesty, the willingness to face what is. You find yourself craving solitude, but not to escape, to listen. Silence becomes a mirror. The same stillness that once terrified you now feels alive. You start to understand why mystics called it the ground of being. In those moments, the boundaries between inner and outer blur. The trees outside seem to breathe with you. The night sky feels intimate, as if the stars are watching you remember something you've always known. This is the self, not the ego's inflated version, but the deeper center that holds opposites together. The self isn't found. It's revealed when you stop resisting. It's the quiet intelligence that has guided you all along, arranging your detours, your heartbreaks, your encounters, all for one purpose: awakening. And slowly, your relationship with busyness transforms. You still move through the world, still work, still strive, but the compulsion fades. The urgency softens. You act not to prove, but to express. Your doing arises from being. You begin to realize that the most profound form of connection doesn't happen when you show your best self, but when you reveal your whole self, the light and the shadow intertwined. There's a moment, quiet but unmistakable, when you feel compassion, not the sentimental kind, but the kind that comes from understanding your own darkness so deeply you can no longer judge anyone else for theirs. You start to see that the soul's evolution is not a climb upward, but a spiral inward. Each descent brings you closer to the center. Each loss strips away another layer of illusion until what remains is essence. And maybe, for the first time, you stop pretending to be busy, not because you've finished everything, but because you've finally understood there's nothing left to run from. You wake one morning and realize that the storm has passed, not because the sky has cleared, but because you've stopped fighting the rain. There's a stillness now, not empty, but full, like the silence after a symphony ends. Something inside you has shifted. You no longer reach for distraction the moment quiet arrives. The quiet has become your companion. The old reflexes still whisper sometimes, the urge to fill your schedule, to scroll, to explain yourself. But you see them for what they are, now echoes of a self that was always afraid of vanishing. You smile, gently, at your own defenses. You no longer need to destroy them. You simply outgrow them. Jung would have called this the beginning of integration, when the opposites within you begin to converse rather than compete. The conscious and the unconscious, the persona and the shadow, the masculine and feminine within, they no longer pull you apart. They begin to dance. It's strange how stillness changes your perception of time. Days feel longer, fuller. Conversations carry weight. You find yourself truly listening, not to reply, but to understand. Presence becomes your default rhythm, and the world starts to mirror it back. You walk through a city street, surrounded by noise, and yet you feel untouched by it. The noise is still there, the chaos, the chatter, the endless parade of personas, but beneath it all runs a current of awareness. You are no longer lost in the movie, you're awake within it. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not separation from the world, but participation in it without losing yourself. You still belong, but now the belonging begins within. When you meet people now, something subtle changes. You see them not as characters in your story, but as carriers of their own unseen depths. You notice their shadows, their projections, their pain, and instead of recoiling, you recognize yourself in them. It becomes impossible to hate anyone once you've truly met your own shadow. You can disagree, you can walk away, but you can't despise. Judgment softens into understanding. Distance becomes compassion. And slowly, you realize something almost paradoxical. All the parts of yourself you once feared, the anger, the loneliness, the confusion, they were not enemies of the soul. They were messengers. They were asking to be acknowledged, not erased. Every emotion you've repressed becomes a guide once you listen to it. Anger says, protect what matters. Sadness says, something precious has been lost, go find what it was. Fear says, look closer. There's truth in the darkness. You begin to sense that nothing in you is wasted. Even your wounds are sacred. They are the soil where awareness grows. And it's here, in this quiet fullness, that you understand what it means to see with the soul. The world doesn't change, you do. The same old streets now shimmer with meaning. Every stranger holds a reflection. Every silence holds music. You used to pretend to be busy so you wouldn't have to see anyone. But what you were really avoiding was seeing yourself, the raw, uncurated, luminous totality of your being. Now, you see it everywhere. You begin to love solitude not as an escape, but as communion. The inner world that once felt frightening now feels alive, a landscape of symbols, memories, and possibilities. You start to trust your dreams again, your intuitions, the quiet pull of something larger guiding you forward. Life begins to feel less like a race and more like a dialogue between the seen and unseen. You stop asking, what should I do? And begin asking, what wants to unfold through me? And in that question, something miraculous happens. You feel free. Not the reckless freedom of escape, but the serene freedom of alignment. You move in rhythm with yourself. The persona no longer cages you. It becomes a costume you can wear lightly, change when needed, remove when alone. The shadow no longer frightens you. It becomes your creative force, your source of depth and empathy. Even your pain becomes beautiful not because it's gone, but because it's understood. You find yourself walking slower, breathing deeper, speaking less. The need to be impressive dissolves into the desire to be real. When others ask how you are, you no longer answer with performance. Sometimes you just say, I'm here. And that feels enough because it is. In moments of stillness, you feel something vast stirring behind your personality, an intelligence that has no name but feels unmistakably alive. Jung called it the self, the archetype of wholeness, the divine within the human. You don't need to define it, you can only experience it. And when you do, you realize that the entire journey, the pretending, the avoidance, the descent into darkness was not a mistake. It was the path. Every avoidance was a doorway disguised as fear. Every shadow was a fragment of light trying to return home. The secret of your soul was never hidden from you. It was hidden in you, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice. Now you see that life isn't asking you to be perfect, or productive, or perpetually strong. It's asking you to be whole, to let the light and dark within you coexist, to live honestly, fiercely, tenderly, as one who knows that even the deepest darkness is only another shade of light. You used to pretend to be busy so you didn't have to see anyone. Now you slow down, not because you have nothing to do, but because you finally see everything. The faces, the moments, the breath, the miracle of existing at all. This is the real awakening, not a burst of enlightenment, but the simple, steady realization that you were never broken. You were just divided. And now you are returning to yourself. Every shadow reveals its hidden light. Every wound whispers how it wants to heal. Every descent into confusion carries an ascent toward clarity. And in that truth, you rest not as someone who has finished their journey, but as someone who has finally begun it.
You keep meeting the same people because you haven't changed. The faces are different, yes, the names, the voices, the stories, but beneath the surface they move in familiar patterns, tracing the outline of something that's been living in you all along. Each encounter, like a mirror, held up by fate, quietly whispers the same question. What part of yourself are you still refusing to see? It begins as déjà vu. You notice it in the way someone speaks to you, a tone that cuts too deep for how little you know them. The way you're drawn to a certain type of person again and again, despite swearing last time would be different. You feel both the pull and the ache, and somewhere inside a small voice says, "This has happened before." And it has. Not out there, but in here, within the architecture of your psyche, where old patterns sleep like dormant gods waiting to be remembered. Jung called this the process of individuation, the slow, painful unfolding of the self through the confrontation with one's own unconscious. It's not a self-improvement journey, it's an unmasking, because what we meet in others is often the echo of what lies unclaimed within us. You see, the people you meet are not just people, they are archetypes wearing modern faces. They are shadows, projections, fragments of the soul, disguised as chance encounters, the lover who awakens your longing for connection, the friend who betrays your trust, the mentor who mirrors your potential and your fear of it. Each one is a messenger from the depths carrying a part of you that you've tried to exile. When you fall in love with someone's light, it's often your own unlived light calling out to you. When someone infuriates you beyond reason, they are likely holding your shadow, the qualities you can't yet accept in yourself. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." It's not just a clever line, it's a roadmap through the labyrinth of your own mind. Imagine this, your psyche is a vast theatre. On its stage walk the figures of your life, parents, lovers, strangers, enemies, all playing roles you subconsciously assigned. The hero, the betrayer, the victim, the savior. You think the play is real. You forget you wrote the script. Then one day, something shifts. You catch yourself repeating the same line, feeling the same hurt, chasing the same ghost. You realize you've been here before, not in this relationship, not in this city, but in this pattern. The stage lights flicker. The illusion wavers. You start to see through the projection. This is the moment the soul begins to awaken. The same people, they're not coincidences. They're mirrors. Each encounter is an invitation. Will you see what's being reflected this time, or will you turn away again? Call it bad luck, call them toxic, call it fate. But fate, Jung said, is just the name we give to the patterns we don't yet understand. When you become conscious of them, the wheel slows. You stop repeating and start remembering. There's a subtle tragedy in the human story. We crave connection, yet we meet ourselves in every connection. That's why love hurts. It's not just another person we're embracing, but our own forgotten depths. It's why conflict feels so personal. Every argument carries the weight of our inner division. We think we're fighting someone else, but in truth we're wrestling our own shadow. You can feel this in your body. The tightening when someone judges you, as if they've discovered a secret you'd rather not face. The exhaustion after chasing approval, the endless attempt to be seen when you haven't yet looked inward. These are not random reactions. They are the psyche's way of calling you home. You might wonder, if everyone I meet is a reflection, does that mean there's no real connection at all? Not at all. In fact, the opposite. When you integrate the shadow, when you meet your own darkness with compassion instead of denial, you stop projecting it onto others. Only then can you truly see another person as they are, not as a character in your inner play. Until then, life will keep sending you the same lesson in different disguises. The same argument, the same betrayal, the same loneliness, until you learn to recognize the teacher beneath the pain. And when you finally do, something miraculous happens. The people around you begin to change. Not because they transformed, but because your perception did. This is the subtle alchemy of consciousness. You see the shadow name, it accepts it, and in doing so you transmute it into light. The pattern dissolves, the repetition ends. You start to attract not what you need to learn, but what you're ready to love. Still, awareness doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it comes like dawn, slowly, softly illuminating the outlines of what was once hidden. Sometimes it comes like fire, tearing through illusion, leaving you raw, exposed but real. In the end, it's not about avoiding the same people. It's about understanding why they keep returning. Each repetition is a chance to reclaim a lost fragment of yourself, a piece that was once buried under shame, fear, or pride. Every face you meet is a reflection of the self trying to become whole again. So when the familiar pattern appears, the same argument, the same heartbreak, the same disappointment, pause, Look closer. Ask not, why does this keep happening to me, but what part of me is asking to be seen? Because the moment you ask that question, the pattern begins to crack. The unconscious stirs. The mirror shifts from prison to portal. You are not doomed to repetition. You are invited to awakening. Every person you meet is both a mirror and a map, guiding you toward the place where your fragmented selves long to return. You keep meeting the same people because the universe, or perhaps your own unconscious, refuses to let you forget who you are becoming. There's a moment in every life when the mirror becomes unbearable. When you look at someone and see not them but the echo of every hurt that came before. When their silence cuts like an old wound. When their affection feels too close to something you lost long ago. You tell yourself, they're different. You want to believe it. But beneath the surface, the same melody plays a song written by the unconscious, replaying the dance between your shadow and your desire. You begin to sense it, the pattern pulsing beneath the rhythm of your choices. It isn't punishment, it's memory. The psyche remembers what the mind forgets. It recreates the same stories, the same emotional geometry, because something inside you longs to be resolved, not by logic, not by will, but by awareness. This is how the unconscious speaks, not in words but in repetition. It doesn't lecture. It shows, again and again, until you recognize yourself in the reflection. And recognition is the beginning of liberation. Imagine this, you are standing in a hall of mirrors. Each person you meet holds a fragment of you. Some mirrors distort, showing you larger than life, the persona you wear to survive. Others shrink you down, reminding you of the parts you've denied. One mirror reflects your need to be adored. Another, your fear of being seen. Most of the time you walk through this hall unaware that it even exists. But every so often, when life grows loud enough, when pain presses in, you catch your reflection in someone's eyes and realize, I am both the observer and the observed. Jung called this the meeting of the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is simply everything you have exiled from your identity. All the anger you suppressed to stay likable. The envy you buried under moral virtue. The tenderness you traded for control. The shadow waits patiently not to harm you but to return you to wholeness. And so it finds you in others, through others, until you finally turn inward. That's why people repeat patterns of love and loss. Not because they are foolish, but because the soul insists on healing through reflection. The child who felt unseen grows into an adult, drawn to those who cannot see them. The one who was silenced seeks those who echo their silence. The one who feared abandonment clings to those who leave. It is not madness. It is the psyche recreating the wound in the hope that this time you'll stay present long enough to transform it. To meet the shadow is to stand in the dark without running. It's to see the anger, the jealousy, the loneliness, and recognize them as orphans of the self waiting to be welcomed home. But here's the paradox. What we repress grows stronger. The more you deny your shadow, the more power it gains over you. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is why you keep meeting the same people, because your unacknowledged self is still seeking the light of your awareness. Fate is the story your shadow writes, when you refuse to read its message. When you finally turn toward it, when you admit, yes, I am capable of cruelty, I am capable of fear, I am capable of need, something softens. You begin to see that these forces were never your enemies. They were simply unloved parts of you acting out their pain in the only way they knew how. And from that recognition, the shadow begins to integrate. Not disappear, integrate. It doesn't vanish like a ghost dispelled by light. It becomes part of you, reshaped by consciousness. You no longer project your disowned qualities onto others. You no longer demand that someone else carry the weight of what you refuse to face. You begin to see people not as mirrors, but as souls, luminous, imperfect, equal to you in their complexity. This is where compassion is born. When you see your own shadow clearly, you can hold the shadow of another without fear. You no longer need to control or idealize them. You can love them as they are because you have learned to love yourself as you are. Love then becomes an act of seeing, not saving. The persona begins to crack. That's the mask you've worn, the version of yourself polished for approval, shaped by expectation. It kept you safe, but it kept you small. Beneath it waits the true self, raw, uncurated, divine in its imperfection. As the mask falls away, you feel both terror and relief. You realize how much energy it took to perform, how deeply you longed to rest in authenticity. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of individuation, not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. The journey is not upward, but inward. Every descent into the unconscious, every confrontation with the shadow, is a step toward the self, the center that holds all opposites in harmony, light and dark, masculine and feminine, fear and love. The self does not erase contradiction. It embraces it. And as you move closer to that center, your outer world begins to shift. You no longer attract chaos because you no longer need it to awaken. You no longer chase validation because you have met the source of your worth. The people you meet now feel different, calmer, clearer, more aligned. They are no longer mirrors of what you've repressed, but companions on the path of what you are becoming. Yet the journey never truly ends. The unconscious is vast, an ocean beneath the surface of your awareness. Each dream, each emotion, each strange coincidence is an invitation to dive deeper. You will resist it sometimes. That's human. But even your resistance is part of the process, the psyche protecting itself until it's ready to see more. The people who hurt you, the ones you couldn't understand, they were never random. They were pages in the story of your awakening. To forgive them is not to excuse them. It's to understand the role they played in revealing you to yourself. Every betrayal, every heartbreak, every repetition, it was all pointing toward this truth. You are both the dreamer and the dream. And so, the next time life brings you someone familiar, someone who feels like déjà vu wearing a new face, pause before you react. Listen. There's meaning in the repetition. There's guidance in the echo. Ask yourself, what part of me is speaking through this connection? What wants to be healed here? Because awareness transforms everything it touches. The pattern is not your prison. It's your path, winding, circular, spiraling toward the center of your own being. There comes a night, quiet, absolute, when you no longer run from the darkness within. You sit with it. You listen. The noise of the world fades, and what remains is the sound of your own becoming. It's not grand. It's not cinematic. It's tender, almost unbearably human. You realize that every encounter, every repetition, every person you called mistake or miracle was a conversation between your soul and itself. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You used to think enlightenment meant escaping pain. Now you see it means embracing it, allowing the tension between opposites to shape you into something whole. Light needs darkness to be visible. Consciousness needs the unconscious to be alive. Every person who walked into your life carried a fragment of that balance. Some revealed your love, others your fear. All of them necessary. The shadow taught you what you denied. The anima or animus, that inner opposite, the soul image, taught you what you longed to unite. When you fell in love, it was not merely another person you adored. It was the reflection of your inner wholeness, the sacred feminine or masculine your psyche yearned to reclaim. That's why love feels mythic, because it is. It's the ancient dance between opposites playing out through two imperfect humans trying to remember themselves. And when love collapses, it's never truly lost. Something deeper takes root. A recognition that the other was never just them. They were a bridge, a living symbol guiding you toward what your soul needed to integrate. The love you projected outward becomes an inner fire, no longer dependent on anyone's presence yet connected to everything. This is how transformation works. Not as sudden revelation, but as slow remembrance. The unconscious doesn't yield to willpower, it yields to attention. Every time you choose awareness over reaction, you reclaim a fragment of yourself. Every time you stop blaming and start noticing, the pattern weakens. You no longer attract what wounds you, you attract what mirrors your wholeness. Individuation is not the end of suffering. It is the beginning of meaning. Pain doesn't vanish, it deepens. But so does joy. They become two notes of the same chord, one resonating through the body, the other through the soul. You start to live less from habit, more from presence. You stop trying to fix life and start listening to it. Imagine standing in front of a mirror again, but this time you recognize every reflection. The child who wanted to be loved, the adult who pretended not to care, the dreamer who still believes. They are all there looking back at you, waiting not for perfection but for acknowledgement. You meet their gaze, you nod, you whisper, "I see you," and in that simple act the mirrors dissolve. You no longer need the same people to show you who you are. You have become your own reflection. From that moment, relationships change. They become less about completion, more about communion. Less about possession, more about presence. You stop searching for the one because you realize the one you were always seeking was consciousness itself. You meet others now not to fill your emptiness, but to share your fullness. Love becomes not a transaction, but an expression of being. This is the quiet revolution Jung hinted at, the shift from projection to participation, from unconscious repetition to conscious creation. Life no longer happens to you, it happens through you. Yet you will forget at times. You'll slip back into old patterns, mistake the shadow for the enemy again. That's all right. The psyche doesn't demand perfection, only honesty. Each return to awareness is a rebirth. Each mistake a message. You begin to see even your forgetfulness as part of the rhythm, the ebb and flow of awakening. When Jung spoke of the self, not the ego but the center of the total psyche, he described it as both guide and destination. It's the whisper beneath every coincidence, every dream, every ache, that says, there is more to you than you think. The self is not found through achievement. It's remembered through surrender. You stop striving to become and start allowing yourself to be. You notice the world changes subtly when you do. Conversations soften. Strangers seem kinder. The same old places feel new. Because you are no longer meeting the same people, you are meeting them with different eyes. The inner transformation ripples outward, and what once looked like repetition now feels like rhythm, the steady pulse of an unfolding soul. And perhaps one day someone will cross your path, someone who feels unlike anyone you've known. Not because they're extraordinary, but because you are finally ready to meet them without projection. No masks, no mirrors. Just two selves aware of their shadows, standing in the quiet recognition that love, real love, is the meeting of two whole worlds. It won't feel like fireworks. It will feel like peace. You will look back and understand that every repetition was necessary, every heartbreak, a lesson in seeing every betrayal, an initiation into truth, every encounter, a rehearsal for authenticity. The pattern was never your enemy. It was your teacher, patient and merciful, guiding you home to yourself. And now, as you stand at the threshold of that home that still point between light and shadow, you realize the people you keep meeting were never meant to change. You were. Because when you change, you no longer need to repeat. You no longer seek the same stories to learn the same lessons. You begin to create, consciously love freely, and live from the center of your own being. The mirrors break, the pattern dissolves, the cycle ends. And what remains is simple, the quiet awareness that everything you sought in others was an invitation to find yourself. Every shadow reveals its hidden light. Every wound whispers how it wants to heal. Every descent into confusion carries an ascent toward clarity. You are not who you were when this began. You are becoming who you were always meant to be.